seamlessly connected multimodal system. All users should have access to affordable transportation options that link homes, employment, and essential services. So what we're trying to do here is identify those barriers. I want y'all to take a couple of minutes to use the chat feature to list some of those barriers that you think really hinder us from having an accessible transportation system. And you can suggest a strategy, but we want to kind of suggest those, taking them one at a time. So let's try to focus on barriers right now. So just take a couple of minutes to do that.
Daniel, I don't have a chat. I'm on an iPad.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
do you have any?
I'm just gonna have to speak up
Okay, that's fine. That works.
when the speak up time comes.
Well, since we're going to have a little bit of dead time here, everybody's filling out their chat box. You might as well go ahead and share your thoughts.
Well, for number 2, I had, and I'm sure you've gone over these already because I missed the last meeting, but the things that are in the way, you want to know the things that are in the way of that goal.
Right, correct.
Well, bus service times are not reliable and oftentimes not available. Uber drivers don't show up. There aren't sidewalks. Cabs, the expense of cabs in Uber is high, and we don't have bike lanes in many of the places that we need them to get to provide transportation. Those are sort of the things that I wrote down that were in the way of meeting that.
Okay, you said sidewalks not being connected.
Yeah, oftentimes there's not sidewalks at all, or sidewalks don't connect to the bus routes.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that bus service, sometimes the bus routes are pretty far away from the people's houses.
Okay. Bus routes. Okay, so I've written down bus service time. Service is not reliable. Often the routes are not conveniently located. Sidewalks are not, that there are gaps in the sidewalk network, and that's messing with connectivity, not connecting with neighborhoods like they should. Some of the alternative modes, such as, the Ubers and the cabs, are a little too expensive to fill in those gaps, and then we don't have bike lanes. I agree with all those. So let me look at some of these other ones too. So does anybody, and we've kind of gone over some of these, I mean, a lot of our themes overlap, but let's take, again, sidewalks not being connected, being gaps in the sidewalks. What are some solutions to closing those gaps in our sidewalk network?
Well, obviously, policies at the local level, encouraging municipalities to adopt sidewalk requirements as part of building permit requirements. That's often probably the easiest way to do it, is when somebody starts a new construction of a commercial or residential project, requires sidewalk. I think another is broadening access to grant funding that enables communities to build sidewalks.
Okay.
There is an ordinance now that requires developers to build sidewalks, but that ordinance hasn't been in effect for a long time. So, a lot of the older neighborhoods, it's not written in for the developers to do that.
So the grandfathered neighborhoods don't have sidewalks. So how would we incentivize sidewalk development in that? I mean, it kind of falls on the city at that point, but how do we get cities to focus on building sidewalks in older neighborhoods that aren't being redeveloped or that aren't new?
I mean, one way could be tying it to access to funding. That's a
Okay,
a
that's a good.
carrot that isn't necessarily a carrot.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it takes an organization that's handing out the funds to stick to that to be able to enforce it as well. But I think that would be a good idea. It's a lot harder when something's already built to go in and to convince people to put sidewalks in. Let me go to some of these ones in the chats. Let's start with freeways creating barriers between neighborhoods. How would we mitigate a massive freeway to make it connect better between, in Little Rock, you see South Main and Main Street. How do we make that connection better?
Since I discussed that barrier a bit, I'll suggest some solutions. I've promoted the use of below ground freeways. A number of other people have talked about the use of parks to deck parks. Bridges help provide them. These are all, of course, expensive options to a freeway, but when you consider the overall cost of a freeway, putting another bridge or a deck park may not be that much of an addition. But they can make a big difference, I feel, in knitting both sides of a freeway together, particularly below ground. That's my new favorite solution.
Below bridges also, I mean, like you're talking about the deck. I don't know if that's what you're talking about when you mentioned deck, but in Portland, Oregon, for example, they have a bridge across a river, and then underneath the bridge is a place for pedestrians and bicycles. So it's not as extensive as the top part, but at least it's like a bike lane across, but it's built into the bridge.
Okay. And kind of, go ahead.
I was just going to say, back with what James was saying about sidewalks, I think as you're writing those codes, because we are trying to make sidewalks available for both pedestrians and bicycles, the code may need to expand the width of the sidewalk, which is, I think, typically 5 feet, make them 10 to 12 feet wide. If you go to Northwest Arkansas, around Bentonville, there are sidewalks all around the Crystal Bridges Museum that are 10 to 12 feet wide, and so it accommodates that. Then also to what Patrick was just saying about decks, if you go to Dallas and go over by the Ross Perot Museum, there is a park actually built over the freeway, and it's used extensively. There are green areas, there are food trucks, there are benches, and it goes right on top of the freeway. So it's not a new concept, and I doubt that was terribly expensive to add at that point. So I think those ideas can be expanded a little bit to include some greater ideas to go along with them.
Certainly. And actually, James mentions, the barriers between not just the freeways create, but also large multi-lane corridors, your arterials that are not freeways, and even railroads. So there might be some different methods of bridging the gap on those facilities. Obviously, a freeway, you're not going to have pedestrians on. Are there any particular ones for those corridors?
Well, I hate to be Mr. Negative here, but we've got a major issue with the railroad that goes through Mayflower, and that's been an ongoing challenge for us to bridge that gap as you would, because our school district is cut right in half we've got elementary schools on one side and junior high and high school on the other side. Daniel, as you know, we're getting ready to build this sidewalk that connects those two, but yet there's still a railroad crossing there, and the railroad has been very reluctant to work with the city. So if anybody has any ideas how to bridge that gap, I am sure open to those ideas.
I mean, I think in some ways it's, fighting to not close crossings, and part of that's investing in those existing crossings that are unsafe and making them safe, and continuing to put money into, grade separated crossings, in terms of railroads. And in terms of looking at multi-lane corridors, I think part of that is in design, making sure that crossing distances are small, where you have pedestrian, activity, and where you're wanting to encourage pedestrian activity, have refuge islands. So thinking about, medians, things like that as part of those corridors, but also encouraging greater connectivity so that you don't need those multi-lane corridors in the first place.
It's true. That is
Plan,
definitely.
all these could be planning. Because on the front end, if the planning has been done, then there's not a need to go back and retrofit. So if we could just get highway departments, cities, states, to plan in the first place. And you need a checklist, a set of rules to follow, a set of things to make developers do before they build. And now the railroad, track, the only thing that I've seen are overpasses to get over railroad tracks. And so for Mayflower, that's probably their only way to do it at this point. And
when we're getting ready to break ground on a new overpass, but you still have city streets that are going to rely on those crossings as well.
That's true. I think the only place that I can think of a at-grade crossing for pedestrian is in Conway, right by St. Joseph Church, where they have a parking lot and then it goes to the church. And that doesn't seem very common. So it might be worth pursuing more over the railroad crossings. Let's see. We also talk about subdivisions that are not connected. I think we've mentioned that in a few times. So the new subdivisions they lack options for crossover and connectivity. I think we've mentioned trying to find a way to connect pedestrians within those, so requiring some pedestrian connections between developments. If you have a new residential area coming up, you require that right of way. So that's something we've mentioned in others. Let's see. So a barrier is a transportation system that fosters dependence on cars. This one is a big one. How do we focus in on a few things that would to alleviate that dependence?
Well, it's all the things that we've mentioned, but I think good land use planning is probably going to be the key to that. Along with this new overpass, we are cutting a new road around the north side of Mayflower. And I know that the land use plan is a major thing there, where you have areas that are designated strictly for business, but then also mixed use, where you've got both residential and commercial businesses occupying a similar space, where that would incentivize developers to put a grocery store or other retail outlets right there amongst the housing that are going in.
Absolutely. You're talking about Bernadette's comment below, separation of land uses that cause those long distances between your important destinations, home and work, and all the grocery stores you need to get to. Those are, I think I've covered mainly all of those. Let me make sure. I thought I saw one more. But,
One, one,
Go ahead.
this is a very roundabout way, but one could be prioritizing transportation improvements that improve network density and improve connectivity.
So you're saying our investments in picking the projects that we pick should have some key metrics, I guess?
Yeah, key metrics that align with goals that help reduce dependence on automobiles.
Yeah, because many times there's an ordinance, but no one to enforce the planners to put that to enforce that ordinance. We have a complete streets resolution in the city of Little Rock, but there's no one to enforce it. No one to see to it that they do it.
So maybe additional staff trained in codes would be. I mean, a lot of our cities have that, and a lot of it obviously comes down to politics. But some of our smaller cities don't really have that quality control that some of the larger ones do. So it might be something that we could address on a regional level from MetroPlan.
I'd like to add,
Go ahead.
the business of transportation system fostering dependence on cars. To some extent, that is, the transportation system is following the people. As you know, we've talked a lot about people going out until they can afford housing. So I know perhaps some people are tired of me hearing it, but I think that if we increase the amount of affordable housing inside the cities, people won't have to go out so far to find affordable housing. And therefore, we won't have to be dragging these large transportation systems out into the middle of nowhere where the people have gone. And there are a lot of ways that sort of stuff can be encouraged. It's more of a housing issue, perhaps, than a transportation issue, but it affects the transportation. Another thing I've suggested is to increase mixed use development in the city. And you can do that in existing retail areas, existing retail systems, by lightening up on the restrictions and some of the other suggestions this business of that others have suggested of having development restrictions so that you separate the uses. If we opened up our retail and commercial spaces for more residential, that would encourage mixed use, and it might encourage more affordable housing.
So almost like a retrofitting areas that are really car oriented with mixed use, certainly more housing. That's great. Now it's a transportation issue because land use and transportation are so connected. Then Erica mentioned requiring developers to include sidewalks in all projects should be an ordinance, and I think we're working on that. A lot of the big cities do. It's the enforcement issue that we have to make sure we're following through. Does anybody have any final thoughts on theme 2 with barriers? You also have the ability to write those thoughts down and send them to me later, and those will be reflected in the notes that I send out.
Yes.
It's because
Go ahead, Patrick.
I think that I really liked the best practices article. So I suggest, I'm going to put in my notes, one solution is that everybody follows your rules, your best practices that you put out.
Okay, that's flattering. We appreciate that.
Nice article.
Yeah,
Nice,
actually, I forgot to mention the gated streets. That was in that article. That's another barrier that I forgot to mention before. That we have a lot of gated communities now, and that is a barrier to transportation, actually. along with cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, cul-de-sacs, definitely. The gated streets, so, you know, I've always had issues with, you know, apartment complexes putting gates on their, you know, right there off a major road. It doesn't do good for the traffic there. That one might be a little bit more political though. So, but it's certainly something that cities could address if they had the will to. But I agree with you there.
It's the reason the gates are there in the first place is because I think there's a fear that people have of being safe. But a lot of times you'll see a gated street here, even here in Little Rock, and shoot, anybody can walk around it.
Yep, that's true. All right, any final thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
Well, I mean, I'm always the one that pops up about rural areas because I live in Mayflower, but funding is always a problem for a small community. There's a very, very small retail tax base in a town such as this one or Bologna, places like that. So funding is a major obstacle for us to do some of those sort of things that you're talking about. And then you mentioned the political aspects of it. Again, in a small town, everybody knows everybody, and you've got old families that have been in for decades that want things to change. And so you've got that uphill battle there, and I don't know how you address that one.
Yeah, one way might be to find have a warehouse of the existing resources that are out there to fund projects. Other than that, you're talking about, you know, taxes, and that's not always popular. So that's a good point. James mentioned a strategy to encourage and explore emerging technologies that promote and expand transit and microtransit. And that would really help certainly with last mile challenges where there might be gaps in the connections to where people need to go. E-bike share infrastructure, these are all good strategies, and they'll probably pop back up in theme 4 as well. So we'll put a pin in that one. Let's move on to theme 3. So this is reliable, resilient, and safer transportation and environments. The transportation system should be designed and maintained to address infrastructure condition, congestion, safety, and environmental impacts. The transportation system should support the needs of a region with varying urban, suburban, and rural populations and landscapes. So with this one, let's discuss in the chat box specific strategies. Let's start with strategies to mitigate the transportation system's negative impacts on pedestrian and bicycle safety. What are some ways that we can mitigate, you know, the accidents? And Corrine, I know that you probably have some thoughts.
Well, one really important thing that AARP has in conjunction with BACA is the friendly driver program. It's just an excellent way to help automobiles. And I mean, you know, a lot of people that are on bikes haven't had any bicycle safety classes. So they have no idea what they're supposed to do and which side of the street they're supposed to ride on, if they're supposed to have a helmet on or not. And I don't know how we can get the word out any more than we've already done, but the driver friendly program is a free program that AARP offers, and John Landowski and many others from BACA teach it. And I'm a league cycling instructor and teach bicycle safety education. So that is going on, but I don't know how to get it. I don't know how to get people to take it. You know, they just feel like if they're, it's just like people on a scooter. they just get on the scooter and go. Well, they just get on the bike and go, and they just get in the car and go, and they don't realize that there's some safety rules. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is get the highway department to write it into their rule books that where people have to take tests, you know, to get their driver's license. That would be one way to get people to study about what they're supposed to do. Because I get a lot of horn honks and the finger, and a lot of people yell out their car windows because I'm taking the lane. And I'm taking the lane because I don't want them to right turn in front of me or into me
Certainly.
at an intersection.
I've been yelled at too. Yeah. I wasn't even on a bike. I was just a pedestrian. I got yelled at, even though I was in the right of, you know, I had the crosswalk symbol. That's good. What I would say to that is, you know, increase advocacy for training of not only the pedestrians and the cyclists, but the people that drive
Drivers.
around. Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I think from a Metro Plan perspective, we might be able to emphasize this in our publications more, and be an advocate with others, with RDOT, and try to work with them to increase the knowledge in this particular area. I think somebody else had a comment about, yes, Erica, community education about bikers' safety and sharing lanes. So all of that would fall under the education umbrella. Patrick, for pedestrian safety, the use of stand-up pedestrian crossing signs is a big help, both as a pedestrian and a driver. So are you talking about just which signs are you talking about? Just
I'm talking about those, they're like 2-3 feet and they stand up in the middle of the
Okay.
street. They've been doing them a lot in downtown Little Rock, North Little Rock.
okay, yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about now. Pedestrian signs in street, okay.
Along with that, you can say punch buttons
Buttons.
at pedestrian crosswalks, because it also helps bikers too.
Punch buttons at work instead of those fake ones that you read about.
Yeah, well, they put up a great punch button out in front of OZK on Cantrell, and it goes from OZK to nowhere, on a crosswalk across the street to nowhere. And if you're on the nowhere side, there's no punch button on that side.
Yeah, that goes back to connectivities. Definitely, those punch
Right.
buttons need to mean something.
Right.
The CART standards that encourage or require wider sidewalks, screen buffers from sidewalks, separation of bike and vehicle facilities, greenways, buffered bike lanes, bikeways. Crazy you should mention that, James, because we are working on our accessibility guideline or multimodal guidelines that address some of those things. We're close to having a final product on that, and this will probably end up as a strategy in our document, but with the acknowledgement that we have a set and here's where you look. So that's a good one. Tiffany mentions safety and education, convenient crosswalks, wider sidewalks. So convenient, what do you mean by convenience, Tiffany?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Just having them available in areas that people do need a crossover instead of walking blocks to be able to cross over legally.
Okay, so just more crosswalks.
I've seen some places that you definitely need a crosswalk in the mid-block because for various reasons, it could be 2-3 blocks in between intersections. And so you get people that are crossing just in the middle of nowhere because.
So mid blocks, I would emphasize protected crosswalks. Some of those things that James mentioned in the last one, which we want to have protected medians that are designed to have, refuge effect on pedestrians crossing these streets. See roundabouts, separated buffered multi-use paths. Roundabouts are certainly good for automobiles, and sometimes they can the effect on pedestrians can sometimes it's might be an issue sometimes on pedestrians, but it does slow down people coming into a corridor, so that's good.
They have the I can't remember which country. I saw this video. It was on LinkedIn of pedestrian priority or bicycle priority roundabouts, and it threw Finley for our city engineer for a whole loop, because then he went through this thing of who has the right of way in these certain situations, and I got him on a whole afternoon on that one. But it's
That would be an interesting discussion.
concept that's not used here, but it I think is one way that could make roundabouts a lot safer. It's a European idea of just make it dangerous and it makes it safe.
Usually
I've
they
seen
have,
something like that.
usually they have a crosswalk before and after. Well, and a good example of that would be War Memorial, going from the zoo to the park. There's a crosswalk on both sides of the roundabout. And the roundabout, they have to slow down for the roundabout. So that's a great place to put a crosswalk. The problem is they don't have a punch button.
Yeah, I think with the roundabout, it increases efficiency and flow for motor vehicles. So some roundabouts have lights, but then you're sacrificing, the motor vehicle. So it's a balancing act. So it's almost like, well, if we're gonna put in a roundabout, we're just trying to avoid having an intersection. So roundabouts are good safety features. Maybe in our next topic here for automobile safety. Let me move on. Traffic circles, that's actually good. That's something that can slow down traffic coming into a corridor. Obviously speed bumps, synchronized traffic signals for pedestrians, pedestrian bridges, more green space. Let's keep moving because we got a little bit to cover here. And I keep getting them too. Pedestrian safety, better striping. That's actually maintenance is a big issue. Maintenance of safety features. I think that's true. Good examples in Fayetteville, Highway 71. That's a corridor they've definitely focused on. Beautifying crosswalks. Let's talk a little bit about encouraging greater street network density. How does that help pedestrian bicycle safety?
It slows traffic down. I mean, like when you drive through Old Conway, it's hard to get above 30 miles an hour. And there's cars parked everywhere, and you're just having to look out for stuff. And so you got cars parked on the side of the road, makes it safe for the pedestrian. There's so many different ways to get somewhere. So even if one street might have a lot more car traffic, another street's not going to have a lot of car traffic. And so you can ride your bike down that.
That's a good point.
I have a suggestion too, like they use this in Panama and other countries. On Sundays, when traffic is usually light at various business places, they'll close down businesses on Sunday, and the roads are open for pedestrians, bikers, scooters, skaters, and every Sunday close down the roads, certain roads, like President Clinton Avenue, and let the trolleys run, but make it for pedestrians and bicyclists and scooters. And
that's a good idea. I think we see that a little bit, certainly in the River Market. And other.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Every once in a while, not all the time, not every day, just on Sunday. I mean, why not? And people will get used to it. They'll bitch about it at first, but then they'll get used to it.
Certainly, certainly. That's a good one. There are a couple of countries I've forgotten, but I've had those in my in presentations in the past that close down on certain days. Access management is another one that increases safety. That is definitely a good one. Access management.
What are you saying by access management exactly?
So when we're talking about access management, we're talking about limiting the connections to the roads. So driveways on certain corridors where you might be on a commercial corridor that has a bunch of strip centers. If there's a ton of driveways, that's more conflict points with people that could be walking or biking. It's just more turning motions, and it just makes it a little bit more unsafe. And also for cars, so when you have more conflict points, there's more propensity for automobile accidents. So that's something that we definitely need to push in our plans. Mandatory flogging of mean drivers. I'd be down for that one.
Yay, I'm for it.
Okay, and then the last one I have here, and then we'll move to the next one, is street trees. That's actually good. Are there any other features that might help to enhance the pedestrian realm and make it feel a little bit more intimate so that cars don't want to speed? We talked about speed bumps, but are there any other features?
More refuge lanes. Or, you know, not a lane, but
Center island.
put the tree on an island, and also make it a place for people to stand. Because if you can get across one busy side and get on refuge and then get to the other busy side, that works pretty well too.
I would say if you can do that sort of refuge in retrofitting on some of these pedestrian crosswalks, that would encourage the use of these crosswalks, because you see people walking at odd spots to cross a road, and they're standing in the middle of traffic and dodging cars going by at 40 miles an hour. If they knew that walking another half block, they could get one of these refuges, they might do that instead. And that would be safety for everybody.
True. Good point. Any more thoughts on that one before we move on to our next bullet point? Okay. So our next bullet point is automobile safety. Put it in the chat if you have something right off the bat. Go ahead and tell me how you would increase automobile safety.
Well, I already mentioned the friendly driver program and the safety rules and the tests that people have to take to get their driver's license.
Okay. Access management pops up again with reduced lane widths and roundabouts. So you were paying attention earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, auto safety, better shoulders. Okay, so better. Are we saying, when we say better, are we saying bigger shoulders, more clean shoulders?
Sometimes they need to be bigger. Sometimes they just need to be cleaner, without obstructions.
How about rumble stripped properly? Because if you have a rumble strip in the middle of the shoulder, bicyclists can't ride there.
Okay, so place rumble strips, yeah, properly.
Like between the road and the shoulder. And then it actually protects the bicyclist.
Okay. Medians, no traversable median turn lane, so no turn lanes, is what you're saying?
No center turn lanes,
Center turn lanes. Okay.
more deceleration lanes on certain corridors.
Okay, so no center turn lanes. Okay. So
Can you discuss that a bit? I'm wondering, I mean, do center turn lanes contribute to what, head-on collisions more? Or they seem like a very popular, useful item.
They are
Yeah.
very popular in a road diet.
In terms of the turn lane, specifically for like a 4 or 5 lane road, or I guess a 5 lane road, the issue there is all the conflict points. So yeah, you've got people that are turning here, turning there, particularly when you don't have good access management. It does promote that ability to have conflicts where people are flying to get out of the driveway into the the suicide lane. I mean, the fact that it's called the suicide lane by so many people, is kind of an indication. And when you replace that with a median, you've got like this physical barrier that if somebody fell asleep, they don't go across. All those reasons. If you are restricting where turning motions can happen, then that's fewer places where you could get sideswiped or T-boned, rather, not sideswiped, T-boned turning. So it's increasing the predictability within the road.
In some places like in North Little Rock, JFK Boulevard, people use, and I've done it, use the median, I mean, that turn lane as a way to get partially out into the road. And then you wait, and then you go. And it's sort of used as a kind of a holding area because sometimes it's hard the traffic doesn't allow you to both cross the current track and get over to the other side and join you have to kind of separate in two motions. So I'm wondering if you got rid of center turn lane in an existing road, how would you handle existing traffic patterns? Would it be you can't do it until you have better access management, or is it people would just have to deal with it and they'd have to turn right and go down and turn around in some parking lot somewhere and come back? I'm sort of curious as to how you would handle changes to that.
Yeah, it's you take a right and then pull a UE later.
preferably at a protected stoplight. So that's kind of, it's a little bit in coordination with access management there. The easiest path people are going to want to take, sometimes the easiest path is not best for safety. So sometimes creating an environment where you make somebody do something else will save some, damage. So that's the idea. Does anybody else have any other ideas on automobile safety? We did say, Anthony did say increased maintenance intervals of pavement markings and signage. That's absolutely true. We obviously see a lot of our roads not being, the striping has come off, which makes it a little bit dangerous. Some of those markers that say you're going the wrong way are gone by, it seems like a month later. Let's see, with the increasing, of use of autonomous vehicles that kind of need those markings to operate. So that's definitely true. We need to maintain our system.
Well, there again, one of the rules is pedestrians have the right of way. However, cars don't stop for pedestrians at all. So pedestrians don't have the right of way, but legally they should, but there's nobody to enforce it. And I've noticed, like even in Washington, DC, on the busiest roads that go to the monuments, when you go to a crosswalk on a rental bike, which I've done many times, people will stop and let you go across in the crosswalk without a stoplight.
And that might be an enforcement thing. If you're,
It is,
yeah, more likely to
It
get
is.
ticketed, you're definitely more likely to stop. So
yeah,
enforcement.
it's an enforcement problem.
Okay, enforcement. So it is 1:51. We have a little bit of time to discuss air quality. It looks like we're probably going to bleed over on this discussion. I'll probably have some more topics into the next meeting. So let's look at air quality for a little bit. I don't think we have anybody here from Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. But does anybody have any thoughts on how we can design our transportation system in a way that enhances our air quality or cuts down on those harmful emissions?
All the
No, they
things
used
we've
to
been,
use electric buses and trolleys instead of diesel.
they use natural gas in Little Rock.
Okay, so,
Almost all the buses are natural gas now.
okay. So
No,
look
that's
into
still,
fleet
I mean, that's
upgrades.
still putting out pollutants, whereas electric would not do that.
Right, you're correct. Electric cars, that's the other thing. And of course, encouraging people on bikes, encouraging people to carpool.
Carpool and bikes, and we can encourage more use of certainly bikes by investing in more bike infrastructure.
Exactly. And sidewalks for pedestrians.
Okay. Let's see, I'm falling behind on the chat here. So we got smoother traffic flow reduces emissions. So how would we create smoother traffic flow?
That's going to be
Synchronized traffic signals.
generally smart, anything that basically improves the traffic flow, whether it's the traffic signals or roundabouts to do that, for instance, by anything that keeps you from stopping unnecessarily.
That goes back to what I said about synchronized traffic signals. If your traffic signals are set to the speed limit, then you have, there's less opportunity to have to stop for a traffic signal. Of course, newer vehicles are coming with, the kill engine feature, which I've got a car that you pull up to the traffic light and it dies until you let your foot off the gas and hit the, off the brake, and then it goes again.
Okay.
So technology is helping that issue.
And that'll probably come up again in a later innovation theme 4. But certainly signal coordination, and maybe smart traffic lights. Those are kind of coming about, where those can communicate with buses to prioritize signal, but that might not help traffic flow as much as bus traffic flow, but that would increase transit ridership. Let's see, robust transit in general, yes. Ride share, e-bike, bike pedestrian, encourage a mode shift. How do we encourage that mode shift? That's the question.
Businesses have to do that. I think businesses have to encourage their people that work in their places to carpool and ride with other people, and maybe get some kind of I don't know, a bus pass break, like if they get a bus pass and ride a bus to work, they get that paid for, something like that. They do that in DC, where they have the metro, and they encourage their employees to ride the metro, so they buy them metro passes.
So it might be something where we somehow need to increase communication between businesses that are large businesses with Rock Region Metro, and somehow we would be able to do that and encourage to set up some of these things.
It might, I mean, it'd be worth a try.
I would say even with when you have bike pedestrian infrastructure, designing it, no offense to Kareen, but designing it for the non-lycra crowd that doesn't feel comfortable, staking their claim on the road, with those separated facilities. Because we can put bike lanes on Highway 5 through Otter Creek, and there's not going to be a ton of people that'll use them.
No, I agree, but there are people that will, I mean, if you build it, they will come eventually.
That's
Some.
true. They come more when it's connected. That's the best part.
Yeah, if you don't have it, they're not going to do it. If employers don't offer the bus passes, then they're not going to use it.
Another thing to change the cost benefit ratio is for cities to quit mandating excessive amounts of parking space with new businesses. You get that a lot in the downtown areas, and I believe North Little Rock has had some discussion about that in the city planners. How many spaces are required that the developers put up? Are they forcing people to park out on the street? And where are they putting the parking lots? So if there are fewer parking spots provided, it makes it harder for people to park. And so it might make it more amenable to finding alternative methods of getting somewhere.
Definitely.
Well, I think if you make it harder for them to park, then the retail merchant sees that as a detriment to their livelihood, and they're not likely to set up business there. There's two sides to that story.
Well, you wouldn't want to go all out and put one car space per business right at the outset. But I think over time, over time, they need to start shrinking the amount of parking.
Well, and certainly not setting a minimum that is unnecessary, and just reducing minimum or not requiring a minimum number of parking spots and letting the businesses decide would actually probably be more effective instead of mandating a maximum. Let me just go through a few of these. We're reaching the end. I think it's been a great discussion. So Anthony says more transportation options, incentivized transit, carpooling and ride share, continued distance working, telecommuting. I think we'll probably see that. That's something that we should certainly talk about in our plan. Let's see. Casey is asking, is diesel still the primary fuel source for school buses? If anybody knows the answer to that.
Well, it is here in Mayflower.
Okay. I would think that it would be.
It still is in Little Rock. Diesel and gas.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm smiling because I'm just reading some of James's comments. So let's see. We recently at MetroPlan completed adaptive signal coordination corridors. I think one of those is in Cabot. I'm not sure. I think maybe Dave Ward Drive might be another one to improve traffic flow. So that does help with those emissions and basically the system travel time reliability, which we'll get to next month. Does anybody have any final thoughts on pedestrian or bike or automobile safety? Oh, also Erica says public charging stations. That's not a bad idea. I'm glad you mentioned that. That will also come up in the technology discussion. So let me write that down.
Yeah, conservation parks, some conservation parks in Missouri have charging stations. I didn't know that, but I found that out near Joplin this weekend.
Okay. That's a good idea. I didn't even think about that. So electronic vehicle charging stations on maybe public areas, maybe public buildings.
Well, Clinton Library has them.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. Okay. Anything else? It is 2 o'clock. We'll give the final word to the next person who speaks, and then we'll call it quits for the day. Nobody? Okay. Well, I appreciate y'all's time. I think we had a great discussion. Obviously, some of these things I'm going to be able to bring up in the next group. So that's the benefit of always having that second group. I can tailor the message. But I appreciate y'all's time. We will be meeting sometime next month to continue theme 3 and then get into theme 4. And hopefully we can knock this out by midsummer, and we'll move on to the next phase of our plan development. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Okay, thank you, Danielle.
Y'all have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.